There are confessions that lighten a man. You have heard of them, the kind spoken in dim chapels or at the bedsides of the gravely ill, where the unburdening of a long-held secret produces something resembling relief, even grace. The confessor exhales, the weight lifts, the world briefly becomes a more navigable place. And then there are confessions of another kind entirely. The kind that once spoken aloud do not lighten the room, but rather fill it, expanding slowly like smoke from a smothered fire until the air itself becomes difficult to breathe. The kind that do not produce relief, but rather a shared and terrible gravity, binding the speaker and the listener together in the knowledge of something that cannot be unknown. Evander Ashbourne's confession was the second kind. He sat, and this alone told Elara everything about the gravity of what was coming, because in the 3 days since she had arrived in his orbit, she had never once seen the Duke of Ashbourne simply sit, simply be still, simply occupy space without the armor of his composure fully in place. He sat in the leather chair beside the fireplace, his elbows resting on his knees, his clasped hands hanging between them, and he looked into the middle distance for a long moment before he began. "My father," he said, "was not the man this county believed him to be." The fire crackled. Elara sat across from him, very still, her hands folded in her lap, her blue wool gown a quiet anchor in the bright winter light that fell between them. She did not speak. She had the rare and invaluable instinct to understand when silence was the most powerful thing a person could offer. The 7th Duke of Ashbourne was celebrated, Evander continued, his voice low and measured, but carrying beneath it something she recognized as the particular exhaustion of a man who has carried a thing alone for far too long. Celebrated as a benefactor, a man of honor, a devoted husband and father. The county mourned him sincerely when he died 18 months ago. There were eulogies, there were donations made in his name. There is, if you have been to the village, a rather ghastly commemorative fountain. Despite everything, the corner of Elara's mouth twitched almost imperceptibly. He was also, Evander said, and here his voice dropped half a register, becoming something harder, more careful, like a man pressing his thumb against a wound he is not yet certain has closed. A man who for nearly 2 decades extorted money from the tenants of this estate, quietly, systematically, through a series of arrangements so cleverly constructed that no single ledger, no single document told the full story. Aldous Fenn was his intermediary, the man who collected the payments, the man who kept the records. The silence that followed this was different from all the silences that had preceded it. It had weight and texture, the specific dense quality of a truth that has just landed in a room for the first time. "The document," said Elara slowly, "the one you burned, was Fenn's personal record of every transaction conducted over 19 years, names, dates, amounts, and at the top of every page the 7th Duke of Ashbourne authorizing each collection in his own hand." Elara breathed in carefully. "And if that document had been made public, every tenant on this estate would have had legal grounds to reclaim what was taken from them." He met her eyes directly now, and what she saw there was not the cold calculation of the man in the library the previous night. It was something rawer, something that had the shape, she thought, of grief. "And the tenants," she said slowly, "the families your father took from, what becomes of them?" Something moved through his expression, swift, complicated, and unmistakably painful. I have been quietly making restitution, he said, for the past 14 months, through anonymous arrangements, improvement of terms, forgiveness of rents. It is slower than justice ought to be. It is imperfect, I am aware of that. But it is something, Elara said. It is all I am able to give them, without destroying everything else in the doing of it. If this story is moving you, if you find yourself leaning closer with every revelation, please pause for just a moment and like this video and subscribe to The Duke's Lost Letters. Your support is what makes these stories possible, and there is so much more of Elara and Evander's story still to come. Now, back to the library, where something is shifting between two people who were never supposed to understand each other.
Elara rose from her chair and moved to the window. The grounds of Ashbourne stretched before her under the pale winter sky, vast, bare-treed, impossibly beautiful, the last of the snow dissolving into the dark earth in slow silver rivulets. She thought about the tenants in their cottages. She thought about the 7th Duke and his commemorative fountain. She thought about Evander Ashbourne, 18 months into a dukedom he had inherited, alongside a secret capable of consuming him whole, quietly, methodically, making right what his father had made wrong, and telling no one. "You have been carrying this alone," she said, without turning from the window. "There was no one else to carry it," he said simply. She turned then and looked at him, really looked, perhaps for the first time, without the lens of fear or indignation or survival. He was watching her with an expression she could not entirely categorize. Not guarded, as it usually was, not cold, something more uncertain than that. The expression, she thought, of a man who has just handed a loaded pistol to a woman he is not entirely sure he can trust, and is waiting to discover, with something between dread and terrible hope, what she intends to do with it. "I am not going to betray you," she said. His expression did not change immediately, but something behind his eyes shifted, a very slow, very careful loosening of something that had been held tightly for a very long time. "You have every reason to," he said. "I coerced you into an engagement. I used your vulnerability as a mechanism of control. You owe me nothing, less than nothing." "No," she agreed, "I do not." She held his gaze steadily. "But I have been poor, Your Grace. I have been dependent and invisible and entirely at the mercy of people with more power than sense. I know what it is to have no recourse. I know what your father's tenants felt, because I have felt the lesser version of it my entire life." She paused. "And I think that you know that is wrong. I think you have always known it. I think that is precisely why you have been quietly, imperfectly, trying to fix it." The Duke of Ashbourne said nothing, but he did not look away. "I will not betray you," Elara said, again quieter now. "Not because of our arrangement, not because of the betrothal, or the social consequences, or any calculation of self-preservation." She lifted her chin in that way she had, that peculiar private gesture of courage. "Because what you are doing for those families, however slowly, however imperfectly, it matters, and I will not be the person who sets fire to the only bridge they have." The silence that followed was long and warm and entirely different from all the silences that had come before it. Evander Ashbourne rose slowly from his chair. He crossed the room to where she stood by the window, and he stopped at a distance that was, once again, technically proper and emotionally anything but. In the bright winter light, she could see every detail of his face, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the sharp angle of his jaw, the precise gray of his gaze. And what she found there, laid unexpectedly bare in the afternoon light, was something she had not thought to look for. Gratitude. Pure, unguarded, and entirely undefended. "Miss Voss," he said, his voice very quiet, "I find that I owe you an apology." "Only one?" she asked. And this time, fully, unmistakably, without qualification, he smiled. It transformed him in a way that was deeply, inconveniently unfair. The severity dissolved. The architecture of his composure gave way to something warmer, something almost boyish, something that made Elara's heart perform a small and very unwelcome maneuver inside her chest. She looked away first, turned back to the window, pressed her fingertips lightly against the cold glass, and concentrated very hard on the grounds outside, where the last of the winter snow was disappearing into the earth. Behind her, she heard the quiet sound of him exhaling, a long, slow breath, the kind that carries something with it as it goes. She did not turn around, but she allowed herself, very privately, very carefully, the smallest of smiles. Outside, a single blackbird landed on the bare branch of the great oak by the east gate and opened its throat and sang, bright and clear and startlingly sweet into the cold Ashbourne afternoon. Something was ending, something else was beginning, and Elara Voss, standing at the window of a library that had already changed her life twice, felt the precise, terrifying, exhilarating sensation of a woman who is starting, against her every intention, to fall.